Hi, I'm Danielle, and I'm going to talk about using subcharacter decomposition to translate unseen logographic characters. Logographic writing systems like Chinese and Japanese are challenging for neural machine translation. They have thousands of possible characters. Many of those characters occur very rarely, and NMT models have limited vocabulary size, usually not more than about 60,000 tokens. It's very likely that some logographic characters in test sentences will not appear in the training data or the model vocabulary. If we encounter an unseen word in an alphabetic language like English, the worst case scenario is that you represent it as a sequence of characters using a subword scheme like BPE. This is fine because there are only about 100 possible characters in English. But if you encounter an unseen character in Chinese or Japanese that's logographic, it's unclear how the NMT system should translate it. This is the problem we're addressing in this paper. One approach to translating rare logographic characters uses their subcharacter decomposition. Many rare characters contain subcharacters which have semantic meaning. For example, the kanji for sardine and the kanji for salmon both contain a subcharacter which is the kanji for fish. And it would be correct to translate both of those characters on the left into English as fish. It would not be a specific translation, but it would be more adequate and more useful than producing an unknown token, an UNC. So far, work on using subcharacter information for neural machine translation does the decomposition before training. A typical approach is to decompose all logographic characters into their subcharacters. Then they learn a BPE subword vocabulary on the sequences of subcharacters, and then train the model on the subcharacter representations. This is very useful for translation between Chinese and Japanese, because it's possible for unseen source and target characters in those languages to share subcharacter components. However, when translating from Chinese or Japanese into a non-logographic language like English, we can't take advantage of shared subcharacters. And we also cannot rely on all of the subcharacters having semantic meaning. Some subcharacter units might instead convey phonetics, or they might be unrelated to the character. For example, the second subcharacter in this decomposition of the sardine character is not useful for translating the character into English. Our approach to this problem is inference-only subcharacter decomposition. We do not retrain the model, and we do not apply the decomposition to all characters. All we do is replace unseen characters with their subcharacter components that are already in the model vocabulary. If the unseen characters contain subcharacters that are not in the vocabulary, we either ignore them, or for a small set of subcharacters, we replace them with semantically similar in-vocabulary characters. And this is a very flexible approach, which we can apply only when useful. So sentences with no unseen characters are not changed. In this slide, I'm just summarizing the different approaches to unseen character translation that we compare in this work. The baseline approach just replaces unseen characters with an UNC token. Then we have two retraining approaches which affect all characters. The difference is that one includes IDCs, which are these special characters that convey structure, and the other approach does not. And then we have two inference-only approaches, which are our approaches that only apply to unseen characters, and those do not require retraining. One of them replaces unseen characters with all of their in-vocabulary subcharacters. The other just keeps the in-vocabulary subcharacter that is either on the left or on the top of the character, depending on structure. This is the subcharacter which is most likely to be the semantic component. I will now briefly summarize the experimental setup we use. There is more information in the paper. We experiment with Chinese to English and Japanese to English translation using 2 domains for each language pair. One is a high resource domain and one is a low resource domain. The vocabulary is learned on the high resource domain. Each domain has 2 test sets. One is a general test set and the other is an unseen character test set. We construct the unseen character test set by holding out training sentences with rare characters until those characters become unseen in the training data. The held out sentences then form the unseen test sets. All of our NMT models are transformer base models. We train them on the high resource domain first, and then we fine-tune the high resource model on the low resource domain to get a model on the low resource domain. Now, with the following experiments, we are first looking for better unseen character translation, but we also want to make sure that there is no degradation in general translation. And importantly, we know that improving unseen character translation might not improve the BLUE score. That's because the reference translation for an unseen character may not have appeared in the training data either, but an equivalent translation that would be a reasonable translation, like fish for sardine, might appear. So I'm first showing results for the retraining approaches, which use subcharacter decomposition when training. This slide shows Chinese to English results. We find that, as expected, unseen test set BLUE does not improve. But we do find that translation of the general test sets, which do not have unseen characters, can be quite a bit worse, and we don't want this. The effect is particularly noticeable for Japanese to English translation. The unseen set translation is now a little better for ASPEC, although a little worse for the Kyoto task, but the general set translations are noticeably worse than the baseline here. Now in this slide, we have results on the same Chinese to English test sets with our inference-only decomposition. We now see that the general sets have no change at all from the baseline in terms of BLUE score, which is good. The unseen test sets do have some small changes up and down as before, although slightly closer to the baseline. For Japanese to English, the general test sets, which suffered a lot under training decomposition in the previous slide, are mostly also unchanged, and in fact the aspect test score can go up. More importantly though, we can see the improved translation adequacy on the unseen test set sentences if we look at examples. In this case, for example, the baseline model translates the kanji for sardine completely wrong. If we train with decomposition, the model produces salmon. Maybe it has seen that salmon is often the English translation when a decomposed kanji contains the fish subcharacter. However, inference-only decomposition produces fish. Fish is not an exact translation, but it is more correct than salmon. A sardine is a fish, but it is definitely not a salmon. Here is another example from the Kyoto free translation task unseen set, where the training decomposition confidently translates the unseen kanji for sores as part of measles into the word spear, which is completely incorrect. Again, it likely does this because of the specific subcharacters that are involved. By contrast, the inference-only decomposition does not match the reference, but it is much closer in meaning and it can be understood. So to conclude, This paper has focused on translating unseen logographic characters into English. We've tried decomposition before training and found that it can hurt general translation when it has to be applied to all characters indiscriminately. And it can also just create confusion when translating unseen characters by generating specific terminology that is incorrect. By contrast, our inference-only scheme can improve adequacy. It's very flexible, so sentences without unseen characters can stay the same, and it's efficient. It requires no retraining. In the future, we hope to see work on automatically determining which characters this scheme is most effective for, or work on improving the automatic assessment of the adequacy improvement. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much to SDL and the EPSRC for supporting this work.